You're listening to The Courage to Live, a grief podcast hosted by the Child Neurology Foundation. Together, we're building a community for parents, caregivers, and all those who walk with the pain of losing a loved one to complex healthcare needs. We invite you to connect with us along your journey. You're not alone, and your child's story continues through you.
We really don't know what grief will look and feel like until we're in it. For me, I never expected never-ending tears, sadness, and I hoped for a clear path toward healing and even an end date. Even though at that time, in the beginning, I didn't think that that was possible. For many people, grief looks different than what they had imagined or what they have witnessed observing someone else who's close to them. Grief shows up in so many ways. Sometimes it's in numbness, sometimes it's in anger, sometimes it waits months or even years before we're ready to look at it and feel it. And sometimes when we think we've found solid ground and we finally feel like we're okay, without warning, we find ourselves back in the depths of day one. I'm sure this has happened to everyone. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Julie Lazzara. Thank you for being here, Julie. Julie is a psychology professor with more than 20 years experience. She's a fierce advocate for accessibility and rare disease awareness, and she's the co-founder of the nonprofit Landon's Legacy. She built this organization to honor her son Landon's life and create a safe, inclusive community for others. Julie has experienced the heartbreaking loss of her son, Landon, and she joins us today to share a little bit of her journey and how grief has changed her life, the way she moves through the world today. Through Landon's Legacy, Julie supports many, and Landon's light continues to shine in powerful and meaningful ways. Today, we're going to talk about when grief doesn't look like what you expected, why it unfolds differently for everyone, and what those differences could teach us about compassion for others and for ourselves and for the people around us. If you've ever wondered whether the way you're grieving is normal, then this conversation is for you. Julie, so many people imagine what grief will look like, and we find it's nothing like what we expected. But before we go deeper into that, I'd like to dive a little deeper into your own personal journey. I'd love for you to start by telling us a little bit about Landon and how he continues to inspire the work you do today.
Thank you, Kathy, and I appreciate you asking about Landon. I think a lot of times when you tell someone that you've lost a person, oftentimes people will say, well, what happened, or how did they die, or something like that. And just by changing the narrative and by saying, tell me about your person before anything else is so refreshing, because as you know, the one thing that we really yearn for as parents is to be able to talk about our kids, because we don't get that when other people get to talk and new things are happening. So Landon, my only son, and he was just a joy, and we didn't know the journey we were going to be on when he was born, but he developed epilepsy at about 4 months old, and before that everything was normal and was progressing, and he was my second child, so I kind of knew what to expect with the new baby and everything. And then epilepsy just took us on a very new journey, and he had a lot of developmental struggles, but Landon was always just such a joy. He had, his personality came through even though he was nonverbal, and he was very delayed on his milestones, but he was motivated to get there. He loved bubbles, he loved Cocomelon, he loved big hugs, just the cutest, most handsome guy. And I think when people met him, they just really kind of took to him. He just kind of had that infectious personality.
That's amazing. I'm sure that he lives on through the work that you're doing, and you keep his memory alive. I'm sure that you do that. Julie, I know you're the perfect person to talk about this, because I think many of us have a picture in our minds of what grief is supposed to be and what it looks like. And you've probably observed it in your career and thought about it from a very different perspective than actually experiencing it and feeling it. So when it arrives and it's nothing like that, I'm sure that you're probably caught a little bit off guard, but is there a moment that you can think of, either personally or professionally, where grief showed up in a way that completely caught you off guard, and how did you deal with it?
I think that grief, yeah, it's not always, I mean, we know that it's different for different people, but it's not always the same even within yourself. And experiencing different types of loss is going to feel different. I mean, they're all forms of grief, but I'll even tell my students things like a breakup, even early on in your life, that's a form of grief, and you're learning these different types of grief as you go on in life. And so in the past, I'd lost grandparents and maybe aunts and uncles, and each one kind of felt different. And then a year before I lost Landon, I lost my nephew, which was very shocking to the family. We did not expect it. And so that was another type of grief. And I just think that every grief is going to feel different. And it is different if, was it a long illness versus was it something that happened suddenly? And then, as you know as well, Kathy, grieving the diagnosis of your child not being able to live the life that you thought they were going to. So you have grieved that as well. So I think us as medical parents have already experienced a great grief. And then when you have this loss on top of it, it doesn't soften it, but you're kind of like, oh yeah, yes, I know that. I know that feeling, that pit in my stomach.
Yeah, so true. I mean, we do a lot of grieving before we experience maybe the loss final, of our child, and even to me, like, I really feel like there's no other loss that's comparable. It's really deep, and the pain is so great that for many people it's very difficult because you're not expecting that level of uh, sadness, and the path looks very negative and very dark to get to the light again, right? To a day where you feel like you can cope and smile, and then along with that comes a little bit of guilt too.
Absolutely.
But like a lot of times when we're on the path of healing too, like it had, like, even if you have a moment where you've been feeling okay, something will happen, right? That'll trigger you to go back to that day one. Like a song will come on, or you'll smell something that reminds you, or you'll just turn a corner, or you'll be driving somewhere and you'll remember, and you have a memory, and it just sparks those memories, and that brings back that sadness and kind of takes you back to day one. So can you describe what that's like? Have you? I'm sure you have experienced those moments as well, and maybe talk a little bit about what you've done to, like, redirect yourself when it catches you off guard like that.
So I'd say for me, seeing little boys that look like Landon, as far as someone that would be his same age, and just seeing that, definitely just my heart just yearns to think, what would Landon be doing? What would he look like? And one time I experienced in church where there was this family, and I saw this little boy, and I could tell there was some similarity to Landon. And I thought maybe he had some sort of condition that I didn't know exactly. But this was after Landon had passed, and I actually approached I was kind of nervous, like, do I approach this family or not? I don't want to seem like a crazy person, but I just got this feeling, I think, from Landon of, like, just approach it and tell them. And I was still trying to give away some of Landon's equipment. And so after church, I told this mom, and as soon as I started talking, I just started to tear up, and I said, your son reminds me of my son, and my son passed away, and I have some things that I think your son might be able to use. And she just hugged me with the biggest hug, and we just connected. And actually, in a full circle moment, I'm actually seeing this family tonight, and their son did have epilepsy, went to the same children's hospital that my son went to, had a very similar condition, and we're recognizing him tonight for a superhero experience. So it's like those little moments where I just think like this is Landon shining down and saying, put yourself out there because you never know how you might touch another family and make a connection.
Yeah. And even that's so hard too, because we tend to want to hold on to the belongings that they had to keep them kind of like alive in our minds, right? So, and that's okay too. Everybody has to do that in their own time. And there's not, I think one of the things I learned pretty quickly is there's not just one path for this.
Yeah.
Everybody do it your way, right?
Kathy, I'm showing if you look behind me, so this is our shoe rack, and Landon's shoes are still on the top, and I don't want to remove it. So it's like I gave some of his things, like the medical equipment that was very specialized, but some things, some of his clothes, some of his shoes, I'm like, no, I want them here, and I want to see them on an everyday basis. Maybe not for everyone, but for me, I like it there.
I can totally relate to that. I understand. And that's okay. It's okay to allow yourself that space and that latitude to keep his stuff right where you want it, and and also move forward where you're ready, right? And I think that kind of leads me to like the loneliness of grief as well, because I think that we tend to build walls around ourselves for protection. And I know for me, I kind of like to deal with my things privately. I don't know about you, but I kind of isolated to deal with it. And that can be very lonely. And then we put that protection around us, and it's very hard to step out of that. Have you experienced anything like that where you've protected yourself and people around you just feel like they just don't understand?
Yeah, for sure.
How do you deal with that to the people around you that love you that just don't understand?
I think, like you said, that you do have to protect yourself. That's what I wanted to say, is that you can't bare your heart to every stranger out there. And I have had a few times where maybe I overshared and it wasn't the right person, and that leaves you feeling more vulnerable. So you really have to tap in to say, like, is this the right timing? And the question comes of like, how many kids do you have, and how do you answer that question? And you have to judge. And I think for the people closest to you that mean well, sometimes you do have to just tell them what it is you're needing at that time, because it can change. So there's the birthdays and there's the angelversaries. And for me, on the angelversary, that is a day that I just want to be sad. That's not really like a celebration day for me. And so people might mean well and do or say things, but like you just have to say, I just send me a heart emoji and that's it. But this is a day I just want to be kind of internal to myself. And I think if you state that, then people know.
Yeah, you have to be able to verbalize it so that people around you can honor where you're at with it, and that may change year to year too. So that goes into the am I grieving the right way, right? Can you talk a little bit to that? Because I really feel like there is no right way to this. Like it is very, very individual.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, grief isn't always crying. Will you cry sometimes? Yes. But depending on whatever you're going through at the time, you may not cry as much. And people may be on medication that has them not cry as much. And I think even something like at the funeral or when something first happens and you're in shock, you may not feel all of those emotions yet because it's not even real to you. So I think try to worry less about what other people are thinking and just be authentically you and try not to judge yourself. But there is that, and you mentioned this earlier, that feeling of feeling guilty that you're going on, and that especially with child loss, that you're going on and your child isn't, and that's not fair. And I shouldn't be eating, I shouldn't be laughing. And with the kids with LGS that often require a lot of care, our world revolved around Landon. And when he passed, I had a lot of additional free time, and I felt guilty about that. Of, well, now I have this time and I shouldn't spend it on myself. I should be spending it on somebody else. And so I think that can be difficult. And even like our morning routine would be, we get up, we get Landon out of bed, we get his breakfast ready. And after he passed, I just couldn't even go in the kitchen because that routine had changed, and I just needed to stay in bed because it wasn't the same.
Yeah, I think back to those times, and for myself too, and it's so it's so hard at that point too, because as a caregiver of a child who has neurological, issues or medical issues, over the years you lose yourself and you become Matthew's mom or Landon's mom. And that's your identity. So then the thing that I found that hit me pretty hard after my son passed, Matthew, with LGS, is that, who am I? So on top of the grieving, you're also trying to identify who you are again as a person in yourself. And that's very taxing to do, right? Everything's very taxing in grief, but then you're also asked to look at that for yourself as well.
Yeah. And you have more time on your hands, where in a normal day, you're going from one therapy to one medication. And by the time the day is like, you're passing out at the end of the day. And then suddenly you have all this time and more time to reflect and look inward. And yeah, it's difficult to know what to do with that.
No, I don't want to do that. Did you have a moment in your grief journey yet, along the path so far, where you had a shift in like how you viewed grief, and how maybe viewing the more positive side of grief, or the lessons that have come out of it that are good for you? Grief is very difficult in its own self. But I think I know I reached a turning point, and I just wondered if you did too at some point. And is that where you created the organization in his honor, or, yeah?
Yeah. And I think, yeah, and we created the nonprofit pretty early on, and that was definitely part of the grieving process, which not everyone has to do, but it was able to work for us. But I think one thing that surprised me is that early on in my life, I was definitely a person very afraid of death, and had difficulty going to a funeral or going to a hospital and dealing with all that kind of stuff. And now I'm a cemetery person. It's a weird thing to say, but I was just talking to my husband about the books that the theme, it has grief in it, and I'm okay in that space. If a friend, somebody, one of their family members passes away, I'm there. But I'm okay in that space because I've been there, and I want to be empathetic to other people who have been, who are going through it. So I see it more, I just view death differently. It's a part of life. We're all going to get there. Yes, it's terrible, but I've just found myself putting myself in that space for other people when I can.
Yeah, I think giving back is, I think, the most therapeutic thing you can do, in my experience anyway, towards healing. It really does have this special quality to it, where if you're giving back, you find meaning, right, in the loss. And it makes it a little bit easier. And then I also had a moment where I made friends with my grief, and just like visually, I was like, let me take your hand and come with me, because it's one of the big things that I learned. It's like, I'm tired of fighting you, right? I just got tired of fighting the whole grief and the sadness and And so I just bring it with me. It's part of me and it's become integrated in who I am now. And like you, I like to be there for other people. But I kind of wanted to end with this and talk a little bit about, a lot of us feel like we're messy in our grief, and that it's very hard and people don't want to look at us because we're grieving and we're crying, and it can be very messy. It's too much, or maybe it's not enough. Maybe I'm not crying enough. I just want to know if there's something that it probably isn't what they expected either, so they're on this path with us, but is there something that you want to say to those new people that may be on this path, or anybody who's already on this path who needs words of encouragement? Is there one thing that you want them all to know about grief?
I think it is part of the human experience. And if we're lucky enough to live a long enough time, we are going to lose somebody that we love. And that is a universal human emotion that goes across all different cultures. And I think just being able to acknowledge that life is short and life is precious and we only know one day to the next. So, yeah, grief is messy, and you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days, and you're going to take a step forward and you're going to take a step back. But I think we're doing the best that we can in this life. And if you show up and you're just, I think, real to yourself and your emotions, and it's okay. It's okay not to be okay. Sometimes it's not possible to be happy all the time. And in the same way, we're not going to be sad all the time. So just the natural shift of emotions is very natural. So you're going to cry sometimes, you're going to happy cry sometimes. You're going to, I think, feeling what's probably the most difficult, like the crying is cathartic. I like a good cry. I say that it's good to have a cry. This is another piece of advice, having a cry playlist that I can just put on, especially in the car. Sometimes I think people might look over at me like, what is wrong with this woman? Just kind of belting out and crying because you're able to get that out. What's harder is like the emptiness and the yearning. So sometimes people will say, well, time heals all wounds. You've probably heard that. And as we know, the years go on and it feels different, but you're still missing that person. You're going to miss them until the day that you die. So that yearning, that longing is always going to be there. Can you get through it? Yes, you can. But just knowing, like you said, that grief, that sadness, I'm always just a little bit sad. Even if I'm smiling or whatever it is, there's a sadness. I've been through some stuff that a lot of people have not. And it changes you at your core, and you hope that you come out the other side, like you said, being able to help somebody make a difference. I just think of Landon smiling down, or like, while I'm still here, however long that may be, what do you want me to do to be your voice, to carry on your message? Because I learned so much from him. He was here, he mattered. What can I do with that? And he didn't have a voice, a true voice when he was here. So we were already used to being advocating mamas, being in this medical mom community. And I've just tuned into keeping on doing that for Landon. And I think of him smiling down.
Well, I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is, and I'm sure he's with you every step of the way. I'm sure he's very proud of his mom. Like, grief rarely follows a timeline that we can envision. It just doesn't do it. It surprises us every step of the way. It changes shape, it reappears in unexpected moments, and it looks completely different from you to me. Each person's going to do this individually their way, and that is okay, right? But that doesn't mean that anything is wrong with you. It means you're human. And we're navigating a huge loss the best way we can, the only way we know how at the moment, and that's enough. That's just enough. So we're going to close here, but if today's conversation brought someone to mind, someone who's carrying grief quietly or even loudly, consider passing this episode along to them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer is simply a reminder that you're not alone, which you're doing a great job at, Julie. And my heart, I love it. I love that you're there for others.
You are too, Kathy. And then it's one of those things where I'm so thankful that we connected. I wish it wasn't in this way, but your mama heart knows my mama heart in a way that is very unique. And so I
making me want to cry, Julie.
But I do like to think that, like, when I meet another parent that is lost, I think of our kids meeting on the other side and kind of being like, look at our mamas down there, look at our parents down there. That's what I like to think.
Well, thanks for taking the time, and I want to thank the audience for listening in and hearing about Landon, learning a little bit more about him and your organization and your path, Julie, your journey with grief. And thanks for letting us be part of your day. And Julie, Landon lives on through you, and that's the most important thing. Right?
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you for joining us for The Courage to Live, a grief podcast hosted by the Child Neurology Foundation, sponsored by BioCodex. Together, we're building a community for parents, caregivers, and all those who walk with the pain of losing a loved one to complex healthcare needs. We invite you to connect with us along your journey. You're not alone, and your child's story continues through you. More information available at childneurologyfoundation.org.